So moving over to LSU, LSU is a pretty good team overall. They have not had a great start in the SEC, and they are currently sitting near the bottom of the SEC. But they are a team that absolutely can beat people, right? They had a win against Kansas State earlier this season. They had a win against Florida State and UCF earlier this season. They have dropped some games, Pitt, SMU. They've lost 4 in conference to Vandy, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. They do have a win over Arkansas. None of those losses are terrible. They're against some of the better teams in conference. Worst loss by 12 points. Not the worst loss ever. So LSU is a team that would not surprise you if they could put some things together and maybe win a game or two that you wouldn't expect. But they probably will finish, closer to the bottom of the SEC. Ken Palm currently has them projected to go 4-14 in conference. We will see who those wins end up being. Currently, you'd look at like a South Carolina or an Oklahoma, an Arkansas. Maybe a Georgia, maybe a Texas, right? Some of those games are some that maybe you would see a win, but it's definitely a game that Alabama still needs to, play to their potential because anybody in this conference can beat you, right? I think that Vanderbilt showed you that, right? Vanderbilt not at the top of the SEC, but Alabama took a couple of moments off. It really felt like, and they really come back on us, and Alabama has to, kind of step on the gas to get back out to the lead. So really that's what it tells me about this team, and about this league this year is that if you don't play to your potential, any team can beat you. So that's what Alabama has to know, right? I do expect due to that Ole Miss game, and we talked about it for the Vandy preview, because of that Ole Miss game and dropping a game at home, I do think that the team understands, hey, even though Ole Miss was a good team, you still have to play to your potential, right? The Southeastern 16 guys actually broke it down talking about Alabama the other day, and we're talking about, if you look at the home games that Alabama has played this season, their scoring at home has been in conference 105, 107, 64, 103. Right? Oh, sorry, the 105 was South Dakota State. But still, the point remains, right? Alabama has scored 100 points in 3 of the games at home and then has the 64-point outlier, right? Obviously, the 64 points partially due to Ole Miss having some decent defense, partially due to our offense just not playing well at all, turning over the ball a lot. But really, showing that a lack of focus is the difference, right? The outlier when Alabama did not play to their potential shows that Ole Miss could beat you, right? This is another team in LSU that their defense is better than their offense, right? Is their defense as good as Vanderbilt or Ole Miss? No. But their defense is still pretty good, right? It's currently sitting at 51 via Ken Palm. They're 16th in effective field goal percentage. They're actually pretty good at 2-point percentage defense. They're 11th in the country. We've talked about how Alabama is an elite 2-point percentage team. So that is something kind of to note, is that they are good at the place that Alabama is also good. So that's maybe a spot that you're going to want to look at in this game. That both teams are elite from the 2-point field goal percentage. One thing I will say about LSU, and I think that definitely has hurt them this season, is they had an awful non-conference. Currently sits at 340 per Ken Palm. I think that as we've seen, from the team like an Oklahoma or somebody, that really shows to that, hey, maybe you have not gotten your team ready for what the really slate of SEC play is going to be. But what that also means is as the team comes through a few games, they understand, hey, maybe this is what it takes to compete at the highest level, right? Because LSU is another team that has a decent number of transfers. They do have some guys that have played for them before, but they do have some transfers like Cam Carter, their leader from Kansas State, Jordan Sears from Tennessee Martin, and they have others, right, that play massive roles for them and that were not previously on LSU or previously in the SEC. And that matters a lot when you have such a poor non-conference slate, because sometimes it gives your team an artificial expectation of how good you are. And then when you get into a conference as good as the SEC, it really hurts you, right? Because then you get against teams like an Alabama and Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and just the game in, game out grind of what it takes to win in the SEC, and you start taking some lumps. One thing I will note that's important about this is LSU actually had the midweek off this week, right? Alabama played a midweek game against Vanderbilt, but there were 4 teams that did have midweeks off. Alabama's midweek off is coming up at the beginning of February, or the second week of February. But LSU did have the midweek off this week, and so Alabama will be playing a team that's had a little bit more rest than them, potentially been able to clean up some things that they struggled with in the early part of the slate. So I would expect that LSU is going to be a little bit more prepared than they potentially were in some of these other games, going to have a little bit more fire to them, because they've been able to prepare, right? They've been able to extra prepare for Alabama, to do extra cleanups of maybe what caused them some problems in some of the previous games. So I think that is something that to kind of note. Do I think it's going to be a difference in the game? No, but I do think that at the beginning of this game, it's something that Alabama needs to note, is that LSU may have prepared that little bit more that they could, because they didn't have the midweek game, to potentially stop them in preparation or stop them in cleanup, right? So that is something to kind of note for this game, that is a little different when you're facing somebody off a bye when you're not. I think that overall this game is going to be one that could be pretty fast. I think that similar to most games, I think this is going to come down to, is Alabama able to force their pace of play? I think that Alabama has done an incredible job this season of any team that's, thinks about running, Alabama just ramps it up to 100 and absolutely forces that tempo, the number 1 tempo team in the country. I think a lot of that has to do with having the multiple guards that we're able to play with Philon and Sears and Holloway. Chris Youngblood able to force the tempo a little bit more than we typically, have been in years past. We've always been a fast team, but this year's team, it seems like we get out and run even that little bit more. I think that really helps to our transition play. That really helps to our 2-point percentages. LSU is a team that has a couple of big guys, like Jalen Reed and Derek Fountain, guys that have played for them for a little bit that are 6'10". They also have a Robert Miller that's 6'10". So they have a little bit more size than some of the other guys that we've played against this season. That is something to note. That they're going to have a little bit more size. So potentially when you're looking at from a 2-point perspective, that may be part of why their 2-point field goal defense is a little better. I would expect them to try to run Alabama off the line. They've done a pretty good job this season of that. They currently are 75th in the country at running teams off the 3-point line. I will say some of the KenPom numbers may be a little odd when it comes to LSU, just due to the fact that their non-conference slate was so bad, right? When your non-conference slate is that bad, you've played enough teams that potentially has impacted what your actual numbers look like. So if I switch to just SEC offense and defense, LSU is currently 12th in the conference in defense and 13th in offense. If you look at the numbers, they have done a really poor job at turning over the ball. They are 15th in conference in turnovers. They're 14th in conference at offensive rebound percentage. They have not done a good job on the glass. They are an elite free throw shooting team this so far. They're currently 6th. Again, going back to that tempo thing, they're currently 6th in conference in tempo, so I do expect Alabama to be able to bump up the pace in tempo and be able to get out and run with these guys, and typically that helps Alabama from a fast break points perspective, from a potential just getting, into people's bench where Alabama has the guys to be able to swap in and out. You see Nate do platoon swaps, so I do think that could be something you could potentially see. From a defensive perspective, they've actually been one of the worst 3-point percentage defensive teams in the entire SEC, currently giving up 38% from deep. Again, another really poor rebounding team at 13th in defensive rebounding. So this is a team that if you look at just the conference numbers and don't look at the numbers over the course of the whole season due to the fact that their non-conference was so poor, the numbers do shake out to a point where Alabama probably is going to have some success on the glass, right? The offensive rebound numbers don't look that bad. They currently are 63rd in offensive rebound rate. But when you move it over to the conference slate against the 5 teams they faced, part of that is they did face A&M, which is, as we know, one of the better offensive rebounding teams in the entire country. But at the end of the day, LSU has done a really poor job rebounding, right? And that's against the better teams that they faced this season. So that is something really to note when you're looking at things like that is I think that LSU, because of that non-conference slate, is just not going to be prepared to face a team like Alabama. I do think that they're going to be better prepared just because of that week of preparation and not having the midweek. So I think that they're going to be able to give us a little bit better shot than they would if they had a midweek game. But I do think that Alabama at home is going to be just too much. Another thing I will note about this game just before we get out of here, and I'm sorry it took me this long to mention it, but Alabama's going to be rocking some new jerseys for this game. I actually wore this jersey for the podcast for this reason. So this was last year's jersey that they came out with for College Game Day that week, and it was the home alternate. It says Crimson Tide number on the front. Basically, the jerseys that they're going to be playing in for Retro Night this week are going to be the inverse of this. So they're going to be red with the white lettering, white numbers. So they're just going to be the exact inverse of this jersey that I'm wearing right now. So that's what the guys are going to be wearing. They're going to have the block A on the shorts. So that is the jerseys that you're going to see that Alabama is going to be rocking for this Alabama LSU game for Retro Night. I do expect the crowd to be better doing to it being a Saturday night game. I think that there's going to be a lot of people out at this game. So I do expect there to be a really good crowd for this game. I do also expect that Alabama, as I mentioned, is going to have the fire to them. They got embarrassed against Ole Miss, and they're not going to want to have that happen again. And then again, LSU just having the really poor non-conference and having a poor start to the conference slate, quite frankly, I think it's just going to be too much for LSU. I think that Alabama is going to be able to force the tempo. I think that Alabama is going to be able to rebound. I think that Alabama is going to be able to control the pace of this game. I think that Alabama wins, and honestly, I think that Alabama wins fairly large. I think that Alabama probably breaks 100 for the 4th time. I don't know what it is, but a team like LSU that has such a poor offense, and it's not the worst offense in the country or anything, but when they have such a poor offense, typically that leads to a type of game where the shooting is bad and then Alabama gets out either on offensive rebounds or maybe they turn over the ball a little bit more. LSU is actually one of the worst in the country at giving up the ball on offense, giving up steals, giving up turnovers from their offense, right? So if Alabama gets a few turnovers, gets some rebounds, and gets out and runs with the basketball, that typically bumps up that pace of play a little bit. And when Alabama is free-flowing and playing like that, they typically shoot better, they typically play better, and in your home crowd with the new jerseys, with everything involved in this game, I actually do expect Alabama wins this and wins this fairly large. My prediction for this one is actually going to be like 102 to maybe like 78. I think that, like I said, I do think that Alabama actually wins this game fairly large just due to the things that I mentioned. Like I said, I don't think that LSU is prepared for a team with the firepower that Alabama has. I think that Alabama is going to be able to kind of blitz them, and winning on the road is not easy in the SEC, as you well know, but I think that it's going to be even worse in this one, right? I think that because of Alabama's pace of play and because of what Alabama is able to do with the basketball, I think that Alabama is just going to be able to shoot well. They're going to be able to kind of clean up some things. You're also going to see Darion Reed coming back to give us an extra set of fresh legs. As we continuously push that pace and stuff, you get an extra guy to be able to move in and out. I think that certain guys are finding their role in the offense. We talked about Mo D. We talked about Aiden. The other Aiden, Sherrell, I thought that did a really good job. And so I think that overall, just everybody's kind of finding their place in the offense, especially with the injuries and such. I think they're playing really, really well together. And I think that the loss kind of woke the team up. Nate talked about it. As long as you use the loss to kind of build on and learn from, it's okay. And I think that's exactly what happened. So, like I said, I do expect that Alabama wins this game. I think that Alabama wins fairly large. Like I said, I'm going to go with a prediction of 102-78. If you are interested in more content, I am going to put out a thread. It's going to come out Saturday morning, breaking down LSU from a player's perspective, what the numbers actually look like from a, individual shooting perspective and such. So follow me over on Twitter if you are interested in that. Please subscribe to the channel if you like these videos. There will be a breakdown and preview coming out on Sunday, previewing the next game that is going to be against Mississippi State. I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to be in attendance for that game since it is a late game, but it's only about an hour and a half here from Tuscaloosa, so I may be in attendance for that one. But thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.